Oh, that looks good. Hi. Hi. Oh, you just had a cracker. Okay, because I have my tin cup. A little tin cup of water. Hi, we are doing it again. We're doing it all again. It's all happening. Oh, I see little hearts coming. Oh, there they are. Hi. Hey, everybody. Hey, Barbara. Hey, Jane. Hey. You're all, it's millions that you're all appearing. You can hear me? Can you hear me? You can hear me. Yeah, you can hear me. Okay. Hooper. Yes. So, it's a nice sunny day, today in the living room. The sun's coming in. I've got like light, but like it was like dark the last few days. We've had this like weird, dark, murky thing going on. So now it's quite pleasant. So yay! I'm gonna go out in the garden. I can go out in the garden. We're reading again today. My book is falling apart. This is very sad. It's very old, and the cover's falling off, but I will survive. Oh, we have all these national days. Like National Donut Day. Today is actual National Library Workers Day, and it is Tuesday of National Library Week. And here we are reading a book. Yay! Okay, awesome. Oh, good, you can hear me. So, I don't know what National Yellow Bat Day is. National Kindergarten Day, that's good. National Chocolate Covered Cashews Day. I don't have any chocolate covered cashews in the house. Who knew? I got all bonnet because it's sunny. So, we're reading more of Little House on the Prairie, and I gotta tell you, this gets rough. Remember I said it's all about Indians? Okay, literally, this next chapter is called Indian Jamboree. Then it's Prairie Fire. Then it's, after that comes Indian War Cry, Indians Ride Away, Soldiers. It's just this whole book winds up becoming about the struggle with the Native Americans and their land, and it's not pretty. So, we just had Paul almost eaten by a panther, and but the Indian wound up shooting the panther, so yay. So now it's Indian Jamboree. Heavens. Winter ended at last. Well, finally. There was a softer note in the sound of the wind, and the bitter cold was gone. One day, Pa said he had seen a flock of wild geese flying north. It was time to take his furs to Independence. Ma said, "The Indians are so near." "They are perfectly friendly," said Pa. He often met Indians in the woods where he was hunting. There was nothing to fear from Indians. Besides, one of them had conveniently killed the panther that was threatening the entire community. So, Pa's totally pro-Native American. But you know how Ma is. And so he keeps saying there's nothing to fear. And no, Ma said. But Laura knew that Ma was afraid of Indians. "You must go, Charles," she said. "We must have a plow and seeds, and you will soon be back again." I don't know, it takes him 4 days to go to the store. Could be a while. Before dawn next morning, Pa hitched Pet and Patty to the wagon, loaded his furs into it, and drove away. Laura and Mary counted the long, empty days. 1, 2, 3, 4, and still Pa had not come home. In the morning of the 5th day, they began to earnestly to watch for him. It was a sunny day. There was still a little chill in the wind, but it smelled of spring. Oh, thank heavens. The vast blue sky resounded to the quacks of wild ducks. Quack, quack. And the honk, honk, honking of wild geese. Honk. Okay, we love the geese. The long black dotted lines of them were all flying north. Laura and Mary played outdoors in the wild, sweet weather. And poor Jack watched them and sighed. He couldn't run and play anymore because he was chained. Laura and Mary tried to comfort him, but he didn't want petting. He wanted to be free again, as he used to be. I keep saying this whole Kansas thing. It's just, Pa didn't come that morning. He didn't come that afternoon. Ma said it must have taken him a long time to trade his furs. That afternoon, Laura and Mary were playing hopscotch. They marked the lines with a stick in the muddy yard. Mary really didn't want to hop. She was almost 8 years old, and she didn't think that hopscotch was a ladylike play. This girl's uptight, and she's 8 years old, really, seriously. But Laura teased and coaxed and said that if they stayed outdoors, they would be sure to see Pa the minute he came from the creek bottom. So Mary was hopping. So she's only 8, and Laura's younger than her. So when Laura's having these political discussions with her parents about the rights of the Native Americans, she's like, what, 6? 5? What is going on? It's a very small child. Suddenly, she stopped on one foot and said, "What's that?" Laura had already heard the queer sound, and she was listening to it. She said, "It's the Indians." Mary's other foot dropped, and she stood frozen still. She was scared. Laura was not exactly scared, but that sound made her feel funny. It was the sound of quite a lot of Indians, chopping with their voices. It was something like the sound of an axe chopping, and something like a dog barking, and it was something like a song, but not like any song that Laura had ever heard. It was a wild, fierce sound, but it didn't seem angry. Laura tried to hear it more clearly. She couldn't hear it very well because hills and trees and the wind were in the way, and Jack was savagely growling. "Rrr." Now, have you ever heard traditional Native American music and songs? Yeah, it tends to be rhythmic. Well, usually there's this rhythmic ding, 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 and the rhythmic singing is a high, high, like a chanting. And it does. From a distance, you would just hear, like, the bass. You'd hear, like, huh, 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 and you'd kind of, what the heck am I hearing? Because you just kind of hear the bass line. But yes, it tends to be very rhythmic, very rhythmic. Ma came outdoors and listened a minute. Then she told Mary and Laura to come into the house. Ma took Jack inside too and pulled in the latch string. They didn't play anymore. They watched at the window and listened to that sound. It was harder to hear in the house. Sometimes they couldn't hear it. Then they heard it again. It hadn't stopped. Ma and Laura did the chores earlier than usual. They locked Bunny and the cow and the calf in the stable and took the milk to the house. Ma strained it and set it away. She drew a bucket of fresh water from the well while Laura and Mary carried in wood. All the time that sound went on. It was louder now and faster. It made Laura's heart beat fast. They all went into the house, and Ma barred the door. The latch string was already in. They wouldn't go out of that house until morning. The sun slowly sank. All around the edge of the prairie, the edge of the sky flushed pink. Firelight flickered in the dusky house, and Ma was getting supper, but Laura and Mary silently watched from the window. They saw the colors fade from everything. The land was shadowy, and the sky was clear pale gray. All the time, that sound came from the creek bottoms, louder and louder, faster and faster, and Laura's heart beat faster and louder. How she shouted when she heard the wagon. "Oh no, finally! Is Pa finally showing up?" I need a drink of water. Someone has been, a powwow at the University of Nebraska. I have been to a powwow. It's like totally awesome. Hold on, I have to. I need more crackers. All right, so finally, she is hearing wagons, which is like, oh, thank heavens. She shouted when she heard the wagon. She ran to the door. Because I'm thinking, is it Pa? Because I'm thinking it's Pa. And jumped up and down, but she couldn't unbar it. Ma wouldn't let her go out. Ma went out to help Pa bring in the bundles. He came in with his arms full, and Laura and Mary clung to his sleeves and jumped on his feet. Pa laughed his jolly big laugh. Hey, don't upset me. What do you think I am, a tree to climb? He dropped the bundles on the table. He hugged Laura in a big bear hug and tossed her and hugged her again. Then he hugged Mary snugly in his other arm. He's hugging, much hugging, yay, hugging. "Listen, Pa," Laura said. "Listen to the Indians. Why are they making that funny noise?" "Oh, they're having some kind of jamboree," Pa said. "Jamboree, yay, jamboree. I heard them when I crossed the creek bottoms." Then he went out to unhitch the horses and bring in the rest of the bundles. He had got the plow. He left it at the stable, but he brought all the seeds into the house for safety. He had sugar. Not any white sugar this time, but brown. White sugar cost too much. But he had brought a little white flour. There were cornmeal and salt, and coffee, and all the seeds they needed. Pa had even got seed potatoes. Laura wished they might eat the potatoes, but they must be saved to plant. Then Pa's face beamed, and he opened a small paper sack. It was full of crackers. He set it on the table, and he unwrapped and set beside it a glass jar full of little green cucumber pickles. He brought home a jar of pickles. I love pickles. "I thought we'd all have a treat," he said. Laura's mouth watered, and Ma's eyes shone softly at Pa. He had remembered how she longed for pickles. Oh, Ma likes pickles. Okay, that's good information. Ma likes pickles. I did not know that. Ma likes pickles, but, she made pickles, right? I mean, okay, when I guess Big Woods and later in Plum Creek when she has like a place in the basement and stuff, she make pickles, but they don't really have the wherewithal and the pots and the stuff to make pickles out there and grow cucumbers and whatnot. Oh boy, pickles. That wasn't all. He gave Ma a package and watched her unwrap it, and it was enough pretty calico to make her a dress. Oh, Charles, you shouldn't. It's too much, she said. But her face and paws were two beams of joy. Now, he hung up his cap and his plaid coat on their pegs. His eyes looked sideways at Laura and Mary, but that was all. He sat down and stretched out his legs to the fireside. What is this? He's up to something. Pa's up to something again. Mary sat down too and folded her hands in her lap because she's 8. She's so really. But Laura climbed on a Pa's knee and beat him with her fists. Where is it? Where is it? Where's my present? She said, beating him. Terrible, terrible child. Pa laughed his big laugh, like great bells ringing, and he said, why, I do believe there is something in my blouse pocket. He took out an oddly shaped package, and very, very slowly he opened it. You first, Mary, he said, because you are so patient. And he gave Mary a comb for her hair. And here, Flutter Budget, this is for you, he said to Laura. The combs were exactly alike. They were made of black rubber and curved to fit over the top of a little girl's head. And over the top of the comb lay a flat piece of black rubber with curving slits cut in it, and in the very middle, a little 5-pointed star was cut out. A bright colored ribbon was drawn underneath, and the color showed through. The ribbon in Mary's comb was blue, with the blonde hair, I'm sure, and the ribbon in Laura's comb was red. Ma smoothed back their hair and slid the combs into it. There, in the golden hair, exactly over the middle of Mary's forehead, was a little blue star. And in Laura's brown hair, over the middle of her forehead, was a little red star. Laura looked at Mary's star, and Mary looked at Laura's, and they laughed with joy. They had never seen anything so pretty. And look, here is, indeed, here's, that's there, that would be Laura, and that would be Miss Mary. We see they have little scummy things on their heads. It's cute, this is very cute. Ma said, but Charles, you didn't get yourself a thing. Oh, I got myself a plow, said Pa. Warm weather will be here soon now, and I'll be plowing. It's like his idea of a good time. Oh boy, I got a plow. Yeah, okay. That was the happiest supper they had had for a long time. Well, yeah. I mean, they just went like a whole day without Indians walking in the house or panthers trying to eat anybody or wolves. Or, hey, it was pretty good. Poor things. Pa was safely home again. The fried salt pork was very good after so many months of eating ducks and geese and turkeys and venison. Okay, see, it's a different world, different time. Now, if someone told you, or you were in a restaurant and they said, would you like a venison steak? Would you like roast duck? Would you like roast goose? Perhaps roast turkey with gravy and trimmings? Or would you like a hunk of old salt pork? I do think that most of us nowadays would say, oh, well, I'll have a turkey. Oh, heavens, you have roast duck. I'll have that. Oh, no. They had had too much duck and goose and turkey and venison. Yum, I need some salt pork. It's all relative. It's all relative. You eat the same thing all the time. It's like, ugh, that again. Do you know in New England, along in like the 1700s, it became against the law. They had a regulation that if you had servants, you could not feed them lobster more than so many days in a week. Because lobster was, lobster again. They were disgusting, horrible, crabby things. They were like bugs. They were like, who would eat them? Who's eating that? And lobster was considered like a sad, terrible thing to make people eat. Can you imagine now being told, I'm sorry, you can only have lobster 3 days a week? It's all different, all different. I'm sorry, I would take the duck and the turkey over the salt pork, but there you go. And nothing had ever tasted so good as those crackers and those little green sour pickles. See, they're excited about pickles. But Pa told them all about the seeds, because they're not crops. He had got seeds of turnips and carrots and onions and cabbage. He had got peas and beans and corn and wheat and tobacco and the seed potatoes and watermelon seeds. He said to Ma, I tell you, Caroline, when we begin getting crops off this rich land of ours, we'll be living like kings. got watermelons, because they don't give you malaria. Watermelon does not give you malaria. And he was going to grow his own watermelon. But yeah, I mean, he's going to go wheat for like crops, but he was going to grow tobacco and now have to schlep all the way to, 4 days away. They had almost forgotten the noise from the Indian camp. The window shutters were closed now, and the wind was moaning in the chimney and whining around the house. They were so used to the wind they did not hear it. But when the wind was silent an instant, Laura heard again the wild, shrill, fast-beating sound from the Indian camps. Then Pa said something to Ma that made Laura sit very still and listen carefully. He said that folks in Independence said that the government was going to put the white settlers out of the Indian Territory. Wait, they're going to do something, right? They're actually going to side with the Native Americans and go, whoops, it's your land. They're going to move these people. Oh dear, oh dear. He said the Indians had been complaining and they had got their answer from Washington. Well, he did build his house in the middle of what was their main road. And as he said, they were moving in. Edwards, the Scots, people were moving in. And of course, you had Mrs. Scott going, dead Indian, So maybe the Indians were not happy about this. Every time there was a dog, there's dogs out in the road. They were like, these new people with a dog in the middle of the street. That land, apparently, they had a treaty, and it was typical of the government to go, la, 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 what treaty? And now here we're hearing that they're moving them. Gasp. Oh, Charles, no, Ma said. Not when we have done so much. Pa said he didn't believe it either. He said, they always have let settlers keep the land. They'll make the Indians move on again. Didn't I get word straight from Washington that this country's going to be open for settlement any time now? Well, I wish they'd settle it and stop talking about it, Ma said. After Laura was in bed, she lay awake a long time, and so did Mary. Pa and Ma sat in the firelight and candlelight reading. Pa had brought a newspaper from Kansas, and he read it to Ma. It proved that he was right. The government would not do anything to the white settlers. Interesting. So the paper from Kansas apparently was a little behind the times, a little biased. It was like, the settlers. Meanwhile, in town, they're going, yeah, no, that just came down. They've changed. They're going with the Indians. So, yikes. Whenever the sound of the wind died away, Laura could faintly hear the noise of that wild jamboree in the Indian camp. Sometimes, even above the howling of the wind, she thought she still heard those fierce yells of jubilation. Faster, faster, and faster they made her heart beat. Hi, 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 ya, 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 hi, 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 ha. That's it. We got a hi, hi, and a hi, ya, ha, and a hi, and a ha. Because, yeah, we did like Indian disco. When I get it's a boom, 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 boom. I went to, where the heck was I? Montana? I was in Montana. I remember. Yes, Montana. Rocky Boy Reservation, the Stone Child College, for chief name for late Chief Stone Child, and it's Montana, and it was kind of awesome. And I was invited there actually to do a educational lecture on AIDS, HIV back in the day. And they were having a powwow, and they were having an educational component where they had classes and lectures and all sorts of health subjects. It was really cool. And I got to hang out there for a couple of days, and there was food, and there was dancing, and they had like cool jewelry and stuff you could buy, and it was actually like completely awesome. But yes, I even got I bought like tapes of the music, because it was I thought it was cool, so I don't know. Laura clearly thinks it's cool too. Ma was not happy. Ma would not have enjoyed the powwow, just saying. And now, a fire. Because wait, nothing's caught on fire in like pages. The house hasn't almost burned down in, gosh, I don't know, days. So, I'll have to see. So, prairie fire. Okay. Spring had come. The warm wind smelled exciting, and all outdoors was large and bright and sweet. Big, white, shining clouds floated high up in clear space. Their shadows floated over the prairie. The shadows were thin and brown, and all the rest of the prairie was the pale, soft colors of dead grasses. Pa was breaking the prairie sod with Pet and Patty hitched to the breaking plow. That's like classic. That's like, in the promos for the show, Little House on the Prairie, see Pa out with the plow. It's great. The sod was a tough, thick mass of grass roots. Pet and Patty slowly pulled with all their might, and the sharp plow slowly turned over a long, unbroken strip of that sod. The dead grass was so tall and thick that it held up the sod. Where Pa had plowed, he didn't have a plowed field. Wow, he didn't have a plowed field. The long strips of grass roots lay on top of the grass, and the grass stuck out between them. So, I mean, he had to plow, but then he had to, like, clear off all the stuff that was still, like, there. Because he's plowing, but he's just getting piles of, like, roots. But Pa and Pat and Patty kept on working. He said that the sod potatoes and sod corn would grow this year, and next year the roots in the dead grasses would be rotted. In 2 or 3 years, he would have nicely plowed fields. Pa liked the land because it was so rich, and there wasn't a tree or a stump or a rock in it. Oh, what's the phrase we use? Fallow. To lie fallow. You have fields, and you let some of the go fallow and not do anything, and then you plant other stuff. So he's turning the sod, and he can plant like the potatoes and that stuff that didn't care. But then when he needs the smooth stuff, he's going to do that next. And but he's digging up all the grass and the roots to get soft topsoil. Or so he thinks. Because we all know. Because they moved to another town in the next book. So we all know this ain't going to last. But there you go. Now a great many Indians, not one or two, great many Indians came riding along the Indian trail. Indians were everywhere. Their guns echoed in the creek bottoms when they're hunting. No one knew how many Indians were hidden in the prairie, which seemed so level but wasn't. Often Laura saw an Indian where no one had been an instant before, because of all the little things and gullies and trails. And you notice the Indians have guns, because it's like 1870s. They're not running around bows and arrows. They've already all fully got guns, and some of them speak French, and I'm sure some of them speak English as well. So the Native Americans, they've been having contact with the settlers and with the white Europeans who've moved in for a really long time. So these are not like, oh, look, Indians unspoiled. No, they have guns and horses and the whole bit. Indians often came to the house. Some were friendly, some were surly and cross. All of them wanted food and tobacco, and Ma gave them what they wanted. She was afraid not to. When an Indian pointed at something and grunted, Ma gave him that thing. But most of the food was kept hidden and locked up. Jack was cross all the time, even with Laura. He was never let off the chain, and all the time he lay and hated the Indians. Laura and Mary were quite used to seeing them now. Indians didn't surprise them at all, but they always felt safer near Pa or Jack. Well, for a girl who wanted to see a papoose, I was just seeing everything. One day, they were helping Ma get dinner. Baby Carrie was playing on the floor in the sunshine, and suddenly the sunshine was gone. Oh, I do believe it is going to storm, Ma said, looking out of the window. Laura looked too. Great black clouds were billowing up in the south across the sun. Pet and Patty were coming running from the field, Pa holding to the heavy plow and bounding in long leaps behind it. Uh-oh, they're not clouds. And then what happens? We know what happens. Prairie fire, he shouted. Get the tub full of water. Put sacks in it. Hurry. Oh, no. After all this and the plowing and the planting, Ma ran to the well. Laura ran to tug the tub to it. Pa tied Pet to the house. He brought the cow and the calf from the picket line and shut them in the stable. He caught Bunny and tied her fast to the north corner of the house. Ma was pulling up buckets of water as fast as she could. Laura ran to get the sacks that Pa had flung out of the stable. Pa was plowing, shouting to Pet and Patty to make them hurry. The sky was black now. The air was as dark as if the sun had set. Pa plowed a long furrow west of the house and south of the house and back again east of the house. Rabbits came bounding past him as if he wasn't there. So he's digging a trench. He was out plowing the field, but now he's running around. He's digging Andy M. Yes. He's digging a trench, like a fire break around the house to see if he can't save the place. It's very dangerous. Very, very, very dangerous. Yikes. So Pat and Petty came galloping, the plow and the paw bounding behind them. Pa tied them to the other north corner of the house. The tub was full of water. Laura helped Ma push the sacks under the water to soak them. Oh, because they have the wet bags. It's a fire extinguishing thing. I couldn't plow but one furrow. There isn't time, Pa said. Hurry, Caroline. That fire is coming faster than a horse can run. Yet they can't outrun it. They have to stay. There's nothing they can do. A big rabbit bounded right over the tub while Pa and Ma was lifting it. Ma told Laura to stay at the house. Pa and Ma ran staggering to the furrow with the tub. Laura stayed close to the house. She could see the red fire coming under the billows of smoke. More rabbits went leaping by. They paid no attention to Jack, and he didn't think about them. He stared at the red under the sides of the rolling smoke and shivered and whined while he crowded close to Laura. You see, the rabbits, they know they could run. They can outrun it, and they know they got to go. But the humans, they can't. They can't possibly outrun it. So they literally have to just start digging holes in the ground and dumping water and try to at least create a ring, a fire break, so they can survive. It's bad. The wind was rising and wildly screaming. Thousands of birds flew before the fire. Thousands of rabbits were running. Pa was going along the furrow, setting fire to the grass on the other side of it. Fire break, just like the firemen do. They said backfire. Ma followed with a wet sack, beating at the flames that tried to cross the furrow. The whole prairie was hopping with rabbits. Snakes rippled across the yard. Hey, even snakes got to get away from a fire, you know. Prairie hens ran silently, their necks outstretched and their wings spread. Birds screamed in the screaming wind. Pa's little fire was all around the house now, and he helped Ma fight it with the wet sacks. The fire blew wildly, snatching at the dry grass inside the furrow. Pa and Ma thrashed at it with the sacks. When it got across the furrow, they stamped it with their feet. They ran back and forth in the smoke, fighting the fire. So he set, like the fire department would, a backfire, where he dug a trench and then set the grass on fire and then quickly put it out so there was nothing to burn. So he's created this huge fire break where there's no grass to burn and a huge trench, and they're dumping water on everything. So they got a muddy trench, they got wet sacks. So in theory, they could cause the fire to stop. But if it's just blowing, if it's like, which is prairie fire, might not help. The prairie fire was roaring now. This picture. That's bad. Yeah, that's like a nuclear bomb. I don't know if a furrow and some wet sacks are going to cut it. The prairie fire was roaring now, roaring louder and louder in the screaming wind. Great flames came roaring, flaring and twisting high. Twists of flame broke loose and came down on the wind to blaze up in the grasses far ahead of the roaring wall of fire. A red light came from the rolling black clouds of smoke overhead. Yeah, see, that's the problem with big fires. Now, I live in Tujunga. Some of you may know the name from Tujunga from seeing it on CNN when the hills caught fire, because we had a giant, like right over there, we giant fire in the mountains. The Angeles National Forest caught fire, and all this is in the San Gabriel Mountains. And so it's a great Tujunga fire a few years ago. And it was, we had to evacuate. We had to go to a friend's house because it was just ridiculous. You can't stay here. Our house didn't burn, didn't come close, but you couldn't stay because the smoke was so thick that even if you were in the section of houses that didn't burn, you couldn't hang out, you couldn't breathe. You had to go. So we went to a friend's house for like a week, and it was bad. I remember I looked out this very window and went because I literally saw like the prairie fire. And the problem was, people would say, "Oh, the fire's not close," but these sparks and pieces of burning tree and would go sailing through the air and land ahead of it. Prairie fire. I'm quite familiar with prairie fire. I wish I didn't know this much about fire. I do, unfortunately, know way too much about fire. Yikes. Mary and Laura stood against the house and held hands and trembled. Baby Carrie was in the house. Oh, baby Carrie. What's baby Carrie going to do? Yikes. Laura wanted to do something, but inside her head was the roaring and whirling like the fire. Her middle shook. Tears poured out of her stinging eyes. Her eyes and her nose and her throat stung with smoke. Jack howled. Bunny and Pet and Patty were jerking at the ropes and squealing horribly. The orange, yellow, terrible flames were coming faster than horses can run, and their quivering light danced over everything. So Pa is beating away here. Sack, they got the sacks, Mom and Pa with the sacks, and then here's Laura and Mary freaking out by the house. Because what are you going to do? Pa's little fire had made a burned black strip. The little fire went backing slowly away against the wind, and it went slowly crawling to meet the racing, furious big fire. And suddenly, the big fire swallowed the little one. The wind rose to a high, crackling, rushing shriek. Flames climbed into the crackling air. Fire was all around the house. Then it was over. The fire went roaring past and away. What? Yes. Prairie fire goes whoosh, and if you can figure out how to keep your house, like if you can get your roof wet and dig a trench and whatever, it just goes by. It just goes by, and you can survive it. And kind of terrifying. Pa and Ma were beating out the little fires here and there in the yard. When they were all out, Ma came to the house to wash her hands and face. She was all streaked with smoke and sweat, and she was trembling. She said there was nothing to worry about. The backfire saved us, she said, and all's well that ends well. Not again. All's well that ends well. Oh, again with the all's well that ends right. Yeah, Oh, someone's mentioning the flooding. Yes, and then after we had the fire in Tahunga, then it rained, and we had giant mudslides with huge giant boulders and rocks falling down. It was not fun. But yeah, it's very Little House in the Prairie over here at my house, actually. We have lots of like Little House in the Prairie moments where terrible things happen with nature and we almost die. So there you are. Yikes. The air smelled scorched. And to the very edge of the sky, the prairie was burned naked and black. Threads of smoke rose from it. Ashes blew on the wind. Everything felt different and miserable. The Pa and Ma were cheerful because the fire had gone and it had not done any harm. They're like, yay, we're alive. Tahunga. I spelled Tahunga wrong. Yes, it's a T-U-J-U, but you're close. It's like Tujunga. This is Tahunga. Who knows? Nobody, people in LA don't even know how to spell Tahunga, so it's okay. Ugh. They're so happy that they're not dead. Pa had said the fire had not missed them far, but a miss is as good as a mile. He asked Ma, if it had come while I was in Independence, what would you have done? We would have gone to the creek with the birds and the rabbits, of course, Ma said. That's what they would have run to the creek and just thrown themselves in, so that they wouldn't be dead, but they'd have lost the house. All the wild things on the prairie had known what to do. They ran and flew and hopped and crawled as fast as they could go to the water that would keep them safe from the fire. Only the little soft-striped gophers had gone down deep into their holes, and they were the first to come up and look around at the bare smoking prairie. Oh, the little prairie dogs! There, wait, prairie dogs. Oh, the poor little prairie dogs. It's Meerkat Manor. The little prairie dog. Did it burn? Gophers. I love gophers. Poor little things. Then out of the creek bottoms, the birds came flying over it, and rabbits cautiously hopped and looked. It was a long, long time before the snakes crawled out of the bottoms and the prairie hens came walking. Yeah, the snakes were like, you go check it out. Yeah, the gophers and the bunnies, we'll be here. We'll come later. Yeah, snakes. And the fire had gone out among the bluffs. It had never reached the creek bottoms or the Indian camps. That night, Mr. Edwards and Mr. Scott came to see Pa. They were worried because they thought that perhaps the Indians had started the fire on purpose to burn out the white settlers. Oh, that's scary. That's like attempted murder and terrorism. That would be bad. Pa didn't believe it. He said the Indians had always burned the prairie to make green grass grow more quickly and traveling easier. Their ponies couldn't gallop through the thick, tall, dead grass. Now the ground was clear, and he was glad of it because plowing would be easier. Okay, Pa just is like, yeah, whatever, take stuff and strike. While they were talking, they could hear the drums beating in the Indian camps and shouts. Laura sat still as a mouse on the doorstep and listened to the talk and to the Indians. The stars hung low and large and quivering over the burned prairie, and the wind blew gently in Laura's hair. Now, prairie fires do sometimes just start. It's dry, there's lightning strike, there are just prairie fires. And then, of course, yes, there's arson. And the Indians would have, backfires, be burning grass for farming and oops-a-daisy. So, notice their camp did not burn because they were down by the creek bottoms and not camping out in the field by the road, as it's a eek and shriek. Mr. Edwards said there were too many Indians in those camps. He didn't like it. Mr. Scott said he didn't know why so many of those savages were coming together if they didn't mean devilment. Savages and he's been hanging out with Mrs. Scott. Crazy Mrs. Scott, who thinks that watermelon gives you malaria and hates Indians. Yeah, the Scots are a little bit. So, they're no, devilment. And here you go. The only good Indian is a dead Indian, Mr. Scott said. Okay, Mrs. Scott just said that 10 pages ago. So, the Scots really just should have stayed back east. I'm not sure why the Scots bothered coming all the way out. Because clearly, they just think they hate people. They're not fun. Good heavens. Pa said he didn't know about that. He figured that Indians would be as peaceable as anybody else if they were let alone. Hello, Pa. Thank you. On the other hand, They had been moved west so many times that naturally they hated white folks. But an Indian ought to have sense enough to know when he was licked. With soldiers at Fort Gibson and Fort Dodge, Pa didn't believe these Indians would make any trouble. So see, Pa's thought about this. These other guys are just saying the Indians are savages and devilmen, but Pa saying no, they're people, and they're perfectly nice, but they've been moved a lot, so being people, they're probably really annoyed with us, and yeah, they might hate us by now, but you know what? They're not wild animals, they're humans, and they know that they're soldiers. So yeah, Pa's like thinking about it. He's like negotiating the situation like a person. It's good. As to why they are congregating in these camps, Scott, I can tell you that, he said. They're getting ready for their big spring buffalo hunt. Pa's like, don't you know anything? Don't you guys know anything about, like, the Indians? It's buffalo time. It's buffalo time. Duh, they're having the pre-buffalo party. Where have you people been? See, and he's having to educate Mr. Edwards and Mr. Scott, who are just horrible. As to why they're called, yes, he said, there were 6 tribes down in those camps. Usually the tribes were fighting each other, but every spring they made peace and all came together for the big hunt, which sounds good. They're sworn to peace among themselves, he said, and they're thinking about hunting the buffalo. So it's not likely they'll start on the warpath against us. They'll have their talks and their feasts, and then one day they'll all hit the trail after the buffalo herds. The buffalo will be working their way north pretty soon, following the green grass. By George, I'd like to go on a hunt like that myself. It must be a sight to see. Well, maybe you're right about it, Ingalls, Mr. Scott said slowly. Anyway, I'll be glad to tell Mrs. Scott what you say. She can't get the Minnesota massacres out of her head. Girl ain't got nothing in her head. She also thinks watermelon gives you water. I'm over it with Mrs. Scott, really. So that's a little intense. It's a little scary. That's very scary. So yeah, things were rough. What can I tell you? But prairie fires. Okay, so when we were filming the show, and we're all out in Simi Valley, out on the ranch Big Sky, which was very, very prairie, and it would get really dry in the summer. It's California, not Minnesota, but it would get very dry, and you'd have all this dead grass, and so fire was a thing. And you've seen on the news since, when you've seen fires in Simi, would people say, oh, did the little house burn? I go, no, the little house, well, it wasn't there anymore, but whoosh, really severe fires out there. So while we're filming in the 70s, there was, I want to say 77, 78, there was a huge fire in LA. There were like several, it was the same kind of thing we had recently. There was a Malibu fire, and there was a fire in LA in Laurel Canyon. There were multiple fires burning, and the sky was like black, and the sun rose, and it was this just orange ball in the black sky. It was awful. You could not breathe. Malibu was burning, hills were burning, Laurel Canyon burned, almost down to Sunset Boulevard. It was wild. So while we're filming, we're out there, and we've got a fireman. We've got a guy from the fire department with a walkie-talkie, and they're kind of checking in. And like about every half an hour or so, Michael Landon and the production team would sort of go off in a huddle with the fire guy. And he'd get on the, because we had no phones, we had like nothing, we were like totally trapped. And the guy's fire, he'd get them and they'd talk. And basically was, how close is the fire? Where is it now? And he'd say, no, it's not coming here. But about every hour and a half or so, they would get word that a new part of LA was burning, and one of the crew, someone would have to leave. There would be a little conference, and then they'd say, okay, Joe here has got to go because it's getting near his house. And people would have to go home and rescue their families and horses, and people were leaving. So that got bad. And then my Auntie Marion, she goes up to the fireman, she says, so there's really only one road out of here. He says, yeah, I mean, there's a road that goes that way. It's much further, but yeah, really it's that one. She says, so if, heaven forbid, the fire were to come here over the hill, what exactly would we do? And he said, well, we're trying to keep on top of it. If it came, we would totally go down that road. But if the fire blocked it, we might be able to make a break for it over the hill that way, but it's really more likely for that part to be burning. And my Auntie Mary said, what are you saying? I mean, what if the road is on fire? And he says, well, then we're kind of stuck. And my Auntie Mary said, well, what do we do? He said, well, it's like a prairie fire. It burns right through. He said, so you could throw yourself in the creek, or go into one of the buildings, 'cause remember they weren't real full buildings, it was just a wooden shell, and go in, but lie face down in the dirt, and put your hands over your head, and the fire should blow through and just burn like the paint in the outer part of the building and keep going, and you'll like still be alive, and then can run out the back. And if you're not near a building, throw yourself down in a ditch. Yes, that's what he told us. So that was terrifying. So yes, we were like filming the show, and we were actually in danger of prairie fire. Now, it did not come near us. But as you've seen on the news back in, gosh, what was it, like 2008, 2009, when it burned, see me, boy, did it burn. So yeah, it's prairie fires. We kind of have them in California when they go through. It's a firestorm. It just goes whoosh. It's bad. So there you are. I'm tempted to do one more because this is so freaking scary. We're deep into this Indian thing. I'm gonna read a third chapter because this is cray-cray. So here you go. Next morning, Pa went whistling to his plowing. He came in at noon, black with soot for the burned prairie, but he was pleased. The tall grass didn't bother him anymore. Ha ha. But there was an uneasiness about the Indians. More and more Indians were in the creek bottoms. Mary and Laura saw the smoke from their fires by day, and at night they heard the savage voices shouting. This one is called Indian War Cry. Yikes. Pa came early from the field. He did the chores early and shut up Pet and Patty, Bunny and the cow and the calf into the stable. They could not stay out in the yard to graze in the cool moonlight. When shadows began to gather on the prairie and the wind was quiet, the noises from the Indian camps grew louder and wilder. Pa brought Jack into the house. The door was shut and the latchstring pulled. No one could go outdoors till morning. Night crept toward the little house, and the darkness was frightening. It yelped with Indian yells, and one night it began to throb with Indian drums. In her sleep, Laura heard all the time that savage yipping and wild throbbing drums. She heard Jack's claws clicking and his low growl. Sometimes Pa sat up in bed listening. One evening, he took his bullet mold from the box under the bed. He sat for a long time on the hearth, melting lead and making bullets. It's probably not a good sign. He did not stop until he had used the last bit of lead. So Pa's like making an entire crate of ammo by the fire, so it's not a good sign. Laura and Mary lay awake and watched him. He had never made so many bullets at one time. Mary asked, "What makes you do that, Pa?" "Oh, I haven't anything else to do," Pa said. Oh, Lord. And he began to whistle cheerfully. "I'm making bullets." But he had been plowing all day. He was too tired to play the fiddle. He might have gone to bed instead of sitting up so late, making bullets. No more Indians came to the house. For days, Mary and Laura had not seen a single Indian. Mary did not like to go out of the house any more. Laura had to play outdoors by herself, and she had a queer feeling about the prairie. It didn't feel safe. It seemed to be hiding something. Sometimes Laura had a feeling that something was watching her. Something was creeping up behind her. She turned around quickly, and nothing was there. Laura's getting a little paranoid, but, kind of rightfully so now. Mr. Scott and Mr. Edwards, oh, not again. Mr. Scott and Mr. Edwards, with their guns, came and talked to Pa in the field. They talked quite a while, and then they went away together. Laura was disappointed because Mr. Edwards did not come to the house. At dinner, Pa said to Ma that some of the settlers were talking about a stockade. Laura didn't know what a stockade was. Pa had told Mr. Scott and Mr. Edwards that it was a foolish notion. He told Ma, if we need one, we'd need it before we could get it built, and the last thing we want to do is act like we're afraid. Okay, the guys want to build a fort. They want to build, like in the Westerns, an entire stockade, like Fort Apache and, Walnut Grove. They want to build a flippin' fort. And Pa has rightly said, okay, if you actually need it, you will not get that built because they're over there. If they see you building an entire stockade, they're going to go, oh, look. And by the time you started building it, they would attack, and there's no point to this. It's an interesting idea, but unless you can build a stockade in like 20 minutes, it's not really going to cut it. So that is a good point. Mary and Laura looked at each other. They knew it was no use to ask questions. They would only be told again that children must not speak at table until they were spoken to, or that children should be seen and not heard. Although that doesn't seem to stop Laura from arguing about things all the time. That afternoon, Laura asked Ma. See, it didn't stop her at all. You're not to ask Ma. Laura asked Ma what a stockade was. Ma said it was something to make little girls ask questions. That meant that grown-ups would not tell you what it was. And Mary looked a look at Laura that said, I told you so. Laura didn't know why Pa said he must not act as if he were afraid. Pa was never afraid. Laura didn't want to act as if she were afraid either, but she was. She was afraid of the Indians. Jack never laid back his ears and smiled at Laura anymore. Even while she petted him, his ears were lifted, his neck bristled, and his lips twitched back from his teeth. Arr. His eyes were angry. Poor dog. Every night he growled, more fiercely, and every night the Indian drums beat faster and faster, and the wild yipping rose higher and higher, faster, wilder. In the middle of the night, Laura sat straight up and screamed. Some terrible sound had made cold sweat come out all over her. Ma came to her quickly and said in her gentle way, Be quiet, Laura. You mustn't frighten Carrie. Laura clung to Ma, and Ma was wearing her dress. The fire was covered with ashes, and the house was dark, but Ma had not gone to bed. Moonlight came through the window. The shutter was open, and Pa stood in the dark by the window looking out. He had his gun. Out in the night, the drums were beating, and the Indians were wildly yelling. Then that terrible sound came again. Laura felt as if she were falling. She couldn't hold on to anything. There was nothing solid anywhere. It seemed a long time before she could see or think or speak. So, again, she really describes panic and having a panic attack and stuff. And so she literally, we were talking about how the endless repeating stress of Indians, fire, death, disease, malaria, panthers, is really wearing down to the point where she just finally sits up in bed and screams. And she's hearing stuff and it's freaking her out. And it's got to be just like driving people bananas at this point, this constant threat. And the description of feeling like she's falling in camp, brilliant description of the physical sensation of being totally freaked out and paranoid. She screamed, What is it? What is it? Oh, Paul, what is it? She was shaking all over. She felt sick in her middle. She heard the drums pounding and the wild yipping yells, and she felt Ma holding her safe. And Pa said, It's the Indian war cry, Laura. Ma made a soft sound, and he said to her, They might as well know, Caroline. Oh boy, okay, now it just got real. Because Caroline went, because they've been going, Ixnay on the massacre May. No, do not talk about massacre. Shh. It's fine. The Indians go, they're hunting buffalo. It's great. And when they, no, stockade. And Howie's just said, yeah, it's a war cry. They're not hunting buffalo. They're having a war party, and that was a war cry. And Caroline, he's like, it's too late. We're up making bullets. It's time to tell the children that things have gotten kind of unpleasant. So they're breaking it to the kids now. They might as well know, Caroline. He explained to Laura that was the Indian way of talking about war. The Indians were only talking about it and dancing around the fires. Mary and Laura must not be afraid because Pa was there and Jack was there and soldiers were at Fort Gibson and Fort Dodge. So don't be afraid, Mary and Laura, he said again. I don't know, it sounds kind of like be afraid time. Laura gasped and said, no, Pa. But she was horribly afraid. Mary couldn't say anything. She just lay shivering under the covers. Then Carrie began to cry. Oh, we knew that was going to happen. So Ma carried her to the rocking chair and gently rocked her. Laura crept out of bed and huddled against Ma's knee. And Mary, left all alone, crept after and huddled close too. Pa stayed by the window, watching. So now at this point, they've given up on going to bed. They're all huddled by Ma. Yes, poor little things. And they're like, remember, Mary's like 8, so Laura's like only 6. It's tiny, tiny little children doing this. The drums seemed to beat in Laura's head. They seemed to beat deep inside her. The wild, fast, yipping yells were worse than wolves. Something worse was coming. Laura knew it. Then it came, the Indian war cry. A nightmare is not so terrible as that night was. A nightmare is only a dream. And when it is worst, you wake up. But this was real, and Laura could not wake up. She could not get away from it. When the war cry was over, Laura knew it had not got her yet. She was still in the dark house, and she was pressed close against Ma. Ma was trembling all over. Jack's howling ended in a sobbing growl. Carrie began to scream again, and Pa wiped his forehead and said, "Whew!" Yikes. "I never heard anything like it," Pa said. He asked, "How do you suppose they learned to do it?" But nobody answered that. "They don't need guns. That yell's enough to scare anybody to death," he said. "My mouth's so dry I couldn't whistle a tune to save my life. Bring me some water, Laura." Okay, so Pa just admitted he's scared silly. That made Laura feel better. She carried a dipper full of water to Pa at the window. He took it and smiled at her, and that made her feel very much better. He drank a little and smiled again and said, "There, now I can whistle." He whistled a few more notes to show he could. Oh, the Indians didn't kill us. Then he listened, and Laura, too, heard far away the soft pitter-pat, pat-pat, pitter-pat-pat of a pony's galloping. Uh-oh. It came nearer. Yikes. From one side of the house came the drum throbbing and the fast, shrill, yapping yells. From the other side came the lonely sound of the riders galloping. Nearer and nearer it came. Now the hoofs clattered loudly, and suddenly they were going by. The galloping went by and grew fainter down the creek road. In the moonlight, Laura saw the behind of a little black Indian pony and an Indian on its back. She saw a huddle of blanket and a naked head and a flutter of feathers above it and moonlight on a gun barrel, and then it was all gone. Nothing was there but empty prairie. So one of the Indians apparently decided to leave. Okay, interesting. Pa said if he was durned if he know what to make of it. He said that was the Osage who had tried to talk French with him. He asked, "What's he doing out at this hour, riding hell-bent for leather?" Nobody answered, because nobody knew. The drums throbbed and the Indians went on yelling. The terrible war cry came again and again. Little by little, after a long time, the yells grew fainter and fewer. At last, Carrie cried herself to sleep. Ma sent Mary and Laura back to bed. Next day, they could not go out of the house. Oh no, Pa stayed close by. There was not one sound from the Indian camps. The whole vast prairie was still. Only the wind blew over the blackened earth where there was no grass to rustle. The wind blew past the house with a rushing sound like running water. That night, the noise in the Indian camps was worse than the night before. Again, the war cries were more terrible than the most dreadful nightmare. Laura and Mary huddled close against Ma. Poor little baby Carrie cried. Pa watched at the window with his gun. And all night long, Jack paced and growled and screamed when the war cries came. The next night, and the next night, oh dear, and the next night were worse and worse. Mary and Laura were so tired that they fell asleep while the drums pounded and the Indians yelled. But a war cry always jerked them wide awake in terror. I think that's probably the idea, is that, to let everybody for miles know that, troubles are coming. So, that'll do the trick. Some more water here. Yikes and yikes. Yike. And the silent days were even worse than the night. By the way, there's pictures. There's pictures because they're having, that's a war party. That's not powwow. That is a war party. That is that's what they're doing. Okay. And the silent days were even worse than the nights. Pa watched and listened all the time. The plow was in the field where he'd left it. Pet and Patty and the colt and the cow and the calf stayed in the barn. Mary and Laura could not go out of the house, and Pa never stopped looking at the prairie all around and turning his head quickly towards the smallest noise. He ate hardly any dinner. He kept getting up and going outdoors to look all around at the prairie. One day, his head nodded down to the table, and he slept there. Oh, Pa passed out at the table. He was so tired. Ma and Mary and Laura were still... They all stayed still to let him sleep. They all stayed still. They didn't wake him. They just couldn't. Poor Pa went kaboom, and what are you going to do? He was so tired. But in a minute, he woke up with a jump and said sharply to Ma, "Don't let me do that again." Jack was on guard, Ma said gently. That night was worst of all. The drums were faster and the yells were louder and fiercer. All up and down the creek, war cries answered war cries, and the bluffs echoed. There was more camps, not just one camp. There's things going on here. There was no rest. Laura ached all over, and there was a terrible ache in her very middle. At the window, Pa said, "Caroline, they're quarreling among themselves." Maybe they will fight each other. See, Pa's paying attention. Again, Pa's smart. He's not just freaking out. He's been listening because he knows something's going on. Mm-hmm. They know. Mm-hmm. So, okay, so something is up. He knows they're arguing. Oh, Charles, if they only will, Ma said. All night there was not a minute's rest. Just before dawn, a last war cry ended and Laura slept against Ma's knee. She woke up in bed. Mary was sleeping beside her. The door was open, and by the sunshine on the floor, Laura knew it was almost noon. He said, "Are we back? We back? Eek!" Okay, the whole internet just went woohoo for a second in the middle of an Indian war cry. So she wakes up the next morning. She wakes up in bed. Mary was sleeping beside her. The door was open, and there was sunshine on the floor. Laura knew it was noon. Ma was cooking dinner. Pa sat on the doorstep, and he says to Ma, "There's another big party going off to the south. They're leaving." Laura went to the door in her nightgown, and she saw a long line of Indians far away. The line came up out of the black prairie, and it went farther away southward. The Indians on their ponies were so small in the distance, they looked not much bigger than ants. Pa said that 2 big parties of Indians had gone west that morning. Now this one was going south. It meant that the Indians had quarreled among themselves. They were going away from their camps in the creek bottoms. They would not go all together to their big buffalo hunt. That night, the darkness came quietly. There was no sound except the rushing of the wind. "Tonight we'll sleep," Pa said, and they did. All night long, they did not even dream. And in the morning, Jack was still sleeping limp and flat on the same spot where he'd been sleeping when Laura went to bed. The next night was still too, and again they all slept soundly. That morning, Pa said he felt as fresh as a daisy, and he was going to do a little scouting along the creek. Pa just snaps back like that. He's up all night making bullets. He's sure they're coming. They're all going to die. He's freaking out, and then he's like, got in a quick 7 hours. I'm good. So, yeah, we like Pa. He chained Jack to the ring in the house wall, and he took his gun and went out of sight down the creek road. Laura and Mary and Ma could not do anything but wait until he came back. They stayed in the house and wished he would come. The sunshine had never moved so slowly on the floor as it did that day. But he did come back. Late in the afternoon he came, and everything was all right. He had gone far up and down the creek and seen many deserted Indian camps. All the Indians had gone away, except a tribe called the Osages. In the woods, Pa had met an Osage who could talk to him. The Indian told him that all the tribes, except the Osage, had made up their minds to kill the white people who had come into the Indian country. And he told the children this, as he said, better at the time they know, Caroline. And they were getting ready to do it when the lone Indian came riding into their big powwow. That Indian had come riding so far and fast because he did not want them to kill the white people. He was an Osage, and they called him a name that meant he was a great soldier. Soldat du Chien. Oh, French people, Soldat du Chien. And that's C-H-U-N-E with the accent. Soldat du Chien. Paul said his name was. He kept arguing with him day and night. What soldier of Chien? That's not dog. That's Soldat du Chien. He argued with him day and night, Paul said, till the other Osages agreed with him. Then he stood up and told the other tribes that if they started to massacre us, the Osages would fight them. Wow. So, the only reason they're alive is the Osage said, no, we don't want to kill them, and they happen to have more political clout. They had a guy with super political clout with the Indians, Soldat du Chien, and they went and talked to the Indians. Otherwise, everyone was dead. So they did not kill them. That was what had made so much noise that last terrible night. The other tribes were howling at the Osage, and the Osage were howling back at them. The other tribes did not dare fight Soldat du Chien and all his Osage. So next day, they went away. Well, that's one good Indian, Pa said. No matter what Mr. Scott said, Pa did not believe that the only good Indian was a dead Indian. See? I keep telling you these things. Well, that was terrifying. So, yeah, they laid it out there. And obviously, Laura's writing this in the 1930s with memories of her childhood and having to backtrack, because obviously she was 6. So, did she know that the Osage and the other tribes and what was going on with the government? No. But she backtracked and put it together. And I'm willing to bet my history buff friends on here going, yeah, no, that wasn't the year, and it was the Osage, but then it was I'm sure it's all like probably wrong because. And the settlers, where they were on fairly good terms, as Mr. Ingalls was. That absolutely happened. There were places where people got along, and then there were places where, no, they did not. And there were absolutely people like the Scots saying, I don't care, the only good Indian's a dead Indian. And the thing is, in the 1930s, when she wrote this, there were lots of Mrs. Scots who said the only good Indian was a dead Indian. So it was quite controversial to put this book out like that. But yes, it's really interesting because it was a very intense historical time period where we had people moving west, and the government had told the Native Americans that it was their land. They had said, oh yeah, we've parceled it out where you have this and you have that. And then they went, oh, we changed our mind. And it was not pretty. It was not pretty. And they killed a lot of people. And yikes. So Laura lays it out. There it is. So again, fabulous stuff. It's library week. This will make you go look up your history. Now you can go online, and the public libraries are still all, you can't go in, but they're all operating online. All the good libraries have a website, and you can download books and documents, and there's classes. So yay, we can all study history this week and learn all about the Native Americans and the Osage, what really went down in the 1870s in Kansas. And there you go, and you can see how close it is to, like, yeah, sold that shit. He's the one in the pilot show. He gave Laura a bear claw. That's the one who in the TV show gives her the bear claw. So, and yeah, so Laura put some stuff in the books that maybe kind of sort of happened. And then we made the TV show and maybe kind of sort of did a bunch of stuff. But it all works out, and it makes people go back and read the real history. So we like that. So there you go. You got 3 chapters today. You're very spoiled. You're all spoiled. So tomorrow at 1:30, we do it all again. And thank you for coming. I get to talk to you. Hey, yay, hi. It is so much fun, and I like hanging out with you. And isn't this a lovely bonnet? And I just heard bonnets are on the way. Bonnets are on the way. Because I've seen a couple book orders and candle orders. We're going to get those things out to you. And May 9th, remember, doing my show in the living room. So May 9th, you sign up for that. And thank you all. Wash your hands. Stay safe. Wear little masks. I have a bunch of little masks now. Wear a little mask and get some rest. It's exhausting. This is all exhausting. So take a nap. Don't feel guilty about taking a nap during this. You need a nap. Just take a nap. Look at this. She put up the link. Thank you. Thank you, Cindy. Cindy threw the link up. We love her. So there you are. See you tomorrow. Thanks. Bye.